Man, I feel like it's been so long since you and I have been able to sit down and really get into the nitty gritty of our Kansas City Chiefs, dude. I'm glad to have you back. Glad to jump into week 3 of free agency and all of the splendor that it has provided.
Yeah, man, it's
So
been a pretty hit and miss for sure. But with all the Snead action going on, things have kind of picked up a little bit for the Chiefs and or Chiefs fans, and I think there's a little bit of expectation in the air floating around now.
oh yeah. No, there definitely is. I mean, the fans are feeling good. I mean, everything I'm seeing in Chiefs Kingdom, it's like the three-peat energy is going to carry us all the way into September, and we're not even in April yet. So there's a lot still left to happen. Quick shout out to one of our partners, Atlas Saloon. Want to give them a shout out. Um, they've been around forever, man. In Excelsior Springs downtown, right off Broadway. Schlitz built the building in the 1800s, and since then, Keith and company have really turned it into what it is today, which is a place where you're brewing a lot of craft brews, award-winning craft brews. You've got a great environment on Sundays, and it's just a place where everyone can gather around a local watering hole, if you will, with a lot of fun events. So make sure you check it out in Excelsior Springs. That's the Atlas Saloon. Trey, I think it's fair to kind of jump right into this topic first, and that is the L'Jarius Sneed trade. I feel like we have a little bit of a free agency curse going on with the show here at the Fastest 40, where we record an episode and that night or the next day we get a Chiefs bomb,
Yeah,
right? That
yeah,
last episode we did, Sneed trade happens the next day. The one before that, we got the Hollywood Brown signing the night of the recording after we wrapped. Luckily, we were lucky and got Drew Tranquil,
yeah,
during
yeah.
during the
Live.
recording session. But we missed the Sneed trade, and now is our opportunity to kind of react to it. Now the dust has settled. L'Jarius Sneed signed a 4-year contract with the Tennessee Titans. Chiefs sent him to Nashville. 4-year contract, $76 million, $50 million guaranteed, $20 million of that came in as signing bonus. The Chiefs get a 7th round swap. So we're going to move up in that 7th round, and they also get a 2025 3rd-round pick. What is your first take on that compensation? I know we kind of talked about it in our group thread, but I definitely want you to air that out here too.
Yeah, so I think initially when people look at just the trade for trade, what we got, what they got, I think a lot of Chiefs fans are very happy with that. I personally myself, I kind of feel like L'Jarius seems worth more than that to another team. Definitely worth more than that to the Chiefs fans and to the Chiefs organization as well. But looking at big picture, gaining that cap space, I think we're looking at longevity, and we're not just looking at tomorrow. We're looking at how is this going to impact next year? How's this going to impact how we go into the season this year? And which I think we can expect some moves to be made with now we're in the top 10 in cap space in the NFL, where we can kind of shuffle things around, maybe go get a big ticket guy at left tackle or whatever the move is. I don't know what that is. But I think big picture, you got to look at what this means to the organization. And that's kind of what I'm dragging from it. I do think the value of Sneed was missed in the trade. But again, I think it's big picture, and I think we have to take what we got and move along with the cap space where we knew at the end of the day that was the focus, was to enhance our cap space so that we could go out, get a couple extra key pieces that we needed for that three-peat. Obviously the L'Jarius Sneed was going to be a big part of that. Now he's not going to be. So we got to move some things around and make some big moves. So end of the day, I'm not sweating it very much. I'm okay with it. Now I will say, if our season ended in the wild card last year and maybe we're looking at a different situation this offseason where it's not a heavy pressure to now come out and go for the three-peat, I think maybe the conversation is a little bit different. Whereas I would expect it a little bit more for Sneed on the return from Nashville. from Tennessee, from Nashville. But overall, I'm good with it. I think we made the right decision, and I'm ready to move forward.
You said a couple things I want to make a comment on. One is, if the season didn't end the way that it did last year, I think at least this is how I look at it. I think regardless of the outcome, we were going to move on from Sneed. And, fortunately it didn't end the way that, you just drew out ending in the wild card, because I think we would see a lot more drastic change
Yeah.
throughout the organization if that was the case. It wouldn't just be Sneed. It would be, maybe we don't bring Drew Tranquil back. Maybe, this or that happens, not to get too far in the weeds on that. But where I think, you really hit the nail on the head was the big picture portion of it. The Chiefs, as it stands, have been spectacular at drafting and developing talent from not just the first round, but the later rounds. And that's why we found ourselves in a position that we did with L'Jarius Sneed. We're going to be at a crossroads over the next couple of years where we have to decide who's going to stay and who's going to go.
Yeah.
Next year, it's Creed Humphrey, it's Nick Bolton, it's Trey Smith. The following year, it's Trent McDuffie, it's George Karlaftis, it's the other corners that we have in that backfield, right? Josh Williams, Jalen Watson, Brian Cook. Those are all guys that we're going to have to decide, okay, do we need to give them second contracts? And if we had signed, let's just take this compensation, for example. Let's say we signed L'Jarius Sneed to this contract he ended up earning with Tennessee. Even with the increases in the cap situation, I think it would be hard pressed for the Chiefs to keep everybody that they want to keep moving forward with the L'Jarius Sneed contract. And that's just the unfortunate truth of it. It's not not the Chiefs' fault. They've been so damn good at drafting and developing talent, but that puts you in a constraint where you have to decide who's going to get paid and who's not. I think we're going to find ourselves in a situation where it's either Trey Smith or Creed Humphrey moving forward. I think we're going to find ourselves in a situation where, are we going to, if we keep one of those linemen, or if we somehow find a way to keep both, then likely Nick Bolton's gone. And then even further down the line, it's the cornerback situation with Trent McDuffie, because if he continues doing what he's been doing, he's going to get paid too. And are the Chiefs going to want that money for McDuffie to go to Sneed in that moment? I mean, those are all things that I think Brett Beach was weighing. Now, in terms of the compensation, I totally agree, man. I really would have loved to see a third-round pick for the Chiefs this season so that we can make an immediate impact and do exactly what you just articulated. Go for that three-peat with the most resources that we have available. Even if we didn't spend that third-round draft pick, just having that as a bargaining chip on draft night where we could trade up and potentially move one of those extra third-round picks. Let's say we package the 32nd, a third-round pick, move up 5-6 spots, and you all of a sudden are in a position to draft your wide receiver of the future, or your left tackle of the future. Two holes in the roster that I think still need to be addressed. Like that's impactful for this team. And, that's one of the things I think was missed out on in this particular trade. And there's been rumors about the health of L'Jarius Sneed and how that's played into this situation. And he obviously passed a physical if he's signing this contract. But, there was speculation on him getting moved for weeks now. And we finally are able to close this chapter. Sneed, 2-time Super Bowl champion, made a great impact, a lot of memorable plays. We don't win that game against the Ravens if he doesn't punch that ball out at the goal line.
Legendary
those
play.
are all super important. So big thanks to what he did on the field. But, 27 years old at this point in his career, I'm glad he got paid. And I'm also glad that it wasn't us using that cap, because there's going to be so many more decisions that are going to need to be made on this roster after this season that I think come with maybe a few more impactful players.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. I want to hit on 2 points real quick before we move on, and it's the players that we need to address within the next 2 years. I think all of those names that you have mentioned, whether it's Nick Bolton, absolutely, he needs to be taken care of before Sneed. If we're looking at it, head to head, Creed Humphrey,
Right.
I think so as well. Trey Smith, I think so as well. Trent McDuffie, obviously. Now George Karlaftis and maybe Trey Smith could be in the same boat, like a tier two out of those five guys. But I think those five are all so crucial that I think we need to take a look at that longevity of the situation in the locker room for the Chiefs, and I think that's well said. Where that's something that Veach is thinking about. How are we going to take care of these guys in the future?
Right.
Number two is mentioning that we develop those players and draft that talent. So one specific position group that we do so well at doing that in is the secondary, and that's why
Defensive back.
that's where we've seen, where a bunch of people wanted to hang on to Tyrann Mathieu, where we had a bunch of guys that, or not a bunch of guys, we had a few guys that we drafted, and we were kind of
Juan
bringing these
Thornhill,
guys
another
up.
one.
Yep. And we kind of brought these guys in and developed them, and we just keep recycling in the defensive back air and in the position field back there. But that's something that's got to be recognized as well. And I think it is another crucial point for the Chiefs to be able to draft that talent, one, but hang on to that staff that we have on the defense side of the ball that
Oh
is
yeah.
so good at developing those players. And it makes it that decision that much easier to be able to move on, knowing that you have the staff that's going to, one, draft another guy that can have that potential. And then two, you got the staff on the field that's going to be able to develop that and create that player that we need to fill that role in our defense. So I'm on board with you, man. I think there's a lot of big moves that are going to happen the next couple of years, and quite honestly, we could see one or maybe even two of those guys get extensions this year now with this cap space. Depending on how things go, and that'll probably be more of a June, July, maybe even August kind of a thing that we see. Once
Yeah.
everything kind of dries up, we finish filling all the spots that we got. We're like, hey, let's spend this extra cash. Nick Bolton, let's get this extension out of the way because you deserve it. You're an animal. We want to keep you a long time. You deserve to be in Kansas City. Let's go get this three-peat. And so we could see that as well. But that kind of rolls us into the next conversation, Dan, where we're talking cap space. As it sits right now, we're sitting at just over 26 mil. Like I said, we're top 10 in the NFL now, so that gives us some leeway to make some moves, going into this effort to make a big push on that 3P, right? That's going to be the conversation all year, is the 3P. So as you see it now, what kind of moves do you see the Chiefs kind of trying to put in place to push that effort?
Yeah, man. I think with the way with where we're at right now, right? We're just about a month away from the NFL draft. Actually, round one is exactly 4 weeks away. So, with that being said, I do not foresee the Chiefs spending any kind of significant money on a free agent before the NFL draft. I just don't think that's going to be something that happens. If anything, like we're going to need a portion of that cap space to pay the rookie draft class after they're drafted, right? So a chunk of that is going to go by the wayside, but I think it's all going to depend on what we do in the draft. Which positions we address with our draft capital is going to dictate who we bring in for that, August training camp signing that you were kind of talking about. We still have a left tackle. We still have some pending free agents from our own stable of players that might get signed. Mike Dana being a big one, Donovan Smith being one. I mean, even Jerick McKinnon, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think are potentials. Not that, I
Yeah.
think that should be a main focus for the Chiefs, but there's potential for us to bring those kind of guys who are familiar with the system back into the fold to contribute to this team if there's not anything that's addressed in the NFL draft. Now, what could also happen is one of those big time trades. Brett Veach seems like, every other year he's poking his head out to make some kind of big deal. And whether it's us offloading a player, us bringing a player in, I mean, you look at what we've done the last couple of years. It's Tyreek Hill getting traded. We traded for Orlando Brown. There was a trade for Frank Clark. And that's just, looking at it since 2018. Those are big names getting moved back and forth by the Kansas City Chiefs. And with there being a need for a wide receiver long term and a surplus of wide receivers that are due to get paid in the NFL, there is potential for a trade draft night, whether it's night 1, 2, or 3, where the Chiefs could be bringing in somebody and using some of this cap space to pay that guy they bring in. So, I mean, those are all things that are possibilities. And with $26 million, I mean, that's not something that the Chiefs typically have in terms of
Yeah.
cap room. I feel like there was one off season the Chiefs went into it with like $100, and they had to do a big time Mahomes restructure so that they could fill out the rest of the roster, before they had to go up to St. Joe. So those are all things that are still going to happen. Is the Chiefs have to fill this roster out and finish drafting those players. And I think the draft happens before any significant moves. And if there is a significant trade, it's happening during the draft.
Yeah, no, well said. I think I'm on the same boat. I think we'll see movement, draft plus or minus 2 or 3 days, and then silence until August, maybe late
Yeah.
July. And then we'll see, Veach and company kind of plug in those last couple guys to fill those last spots like you were talking about a couple of years ago. But yeah, I think I'm on board. I think really what we have now, I think there's one spot, and that being left tackle, where we need to address in the free agency or via trade, where we can't address in the draft. And I only say that because we're pick 32, and really you get those dominant left tackles really sitting at the top 15 picks is where those guys are usually going, right? So it's tough to get a guy after that, but I think everything else can be addressed in the draft. And back to the point of developing guys, where bring young guys in, whether it's on offense, and Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and the offensive line that we have can help develop those guys wherever they're at on the football field. And on the defensive side, we got the coaching staff and the experience now with those guys some of those guys have 3 Super Bowls, where they can kind of mold those guys into, hey, this is how we win, this is how we get it done, and this is how it's going to be going forward. So I'm confident in that. And really, I mean, just talking on that note, it kind of, we've built this culture in Kansas City now to where, winning is the mindset, and there's nothing else to it. And it's fun to watch. But Dan, yeah, I feel like you definitely have something you want to say about that, huh?
No, it's just been awesome. I totally agree.
Yeah, yeah. It's fun to sit back and think about that from time to time. But
Yeah.
Dan, last topic here. A lot of movement has been happening in the regulations for the NFL moving into the season this year, where personally I think we're going to see the same trend that we've seen from the NFL. It's a cash crop. It's a business. This is the focus. Whereas the NFLPA is just getting ran over by new regulations that have zero focus on player safety. It seems like everything the NFL, here's the message over here, says player safety is such a big focus for us. Here's the actual regulation that we're going to put in place that has nothing to do with player safety. So there's several of them that have come out in the last week or so. I think the biggest one really that's been talked about, or the big two really that have been talked about, is the hip drop tackle, and then the adjustments for the kickoff, how the kickoff's going to be lined up moving into this year, which is going to be odd. But let's start with the hip drop tackle. And what are your thoughts on that? How are you feeling about that?
Listen, I get it, right? It's ugly, the injuries that come from this style of tackle. The ankles get dislocated or they break, and it's one of those situations where if it happens to a player, they're likely not going to come back. Or in the case of Mark Andrews last year, it took him a long time to get back into the mix, and even then he wasn't 100% when they brought him back for the playoffs. So, I get it. The thing about the hip drop tackle is sometimes it's hard to avoid. When you have a defensive back who's smaller than Derrick Henry and you're trying to drag someone down from behind, it's hard not to drop your weight to the ground to slow their momentum. Otherwise, you're just going for a ride and you're waiting until
Yeah.
everybody else comes and you give up that first down. It's a game altering play. These
Yeah.
guys aren't out there to, just collect a check. They want to win too. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess I can't speak for all of them. Maybe someone just want the check, but for the most part, these guys are trying to freaking win the game, and you don't win the game if you're not stopping the guy whenever you make contact with him. So I think some of these things are certainly incidental, when it comes to the hip drop tackle. What I think is going to be the issue is it's going to generate a lot more problems than what it's going to solve. Now, we've seen some of these injuries pop up here and there where, the ankle gets pretty tore up and again, it's rough. But how are you going to enforce that? It's going to be so subjective, and
Yeah.
these referees are already so sporadic. There's no consistency. When I get on the soapbox about the stripes, the passion starts to come out of me. And I think this is going to be a problem. I 100% do. I think it's going to be a huge issue where it's going to take away from the overall product of the game. And players clearly aren't even happy about it. I mean, these defensive players, I feel so bad for them because the deck is stacked against them no matter how you look at it. You can't hit a guy over the middle. You can't make contact too soon. You can't use your momentum to try and slow the guy down now. If you accidentally hit the quarterback in the head with your hand when you're rushing him full speed with another 350-pound man on you, then it's a 15-yard penalty. Like, there's all these things where the rules are just stacked against these defensive players, and they got to play through it. And it's going to be tough. It's going to be one of those things where people are going to get pissed off. As fans, players are going to get pissed. Fines are going to happen. The NFL is going to line their pockets with that money for sure.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that, I think it's just going to end up creating more problems than it's going to solve. And you said it perfectly, right? The NFL positions themselves in this place where it's all about player safety. That's why they're creating all of these rules. Well, then, Will Compton actually put a tweet. I don't usually agree with him, but he hit the nail on the head to me. Why are they still playing on turf?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Why are they stacking 2 games on Christmas Day so that teams have to play that game on 4 days rest?
Thursday nights.
Thursday night football, adding an extra game. Like and
Yeah.
not giving them an extra bye week. There's all these
Yeah.
things that the NFL is doing that aren't really, it's not aligning. It's contradictory. So with this in particular, I think it's a PR move more than it is a player safety move for the NFL, just because you see all these gruesome injuries get thrown around on Instagram. And, for those players, I'm sure they're passionate about it, right? Tony Pollard, Mark Andrews, Kenyon Drake said something about it. Those guys who have, Dak Prescott, I think, suffered an injury like this. Those
Yeah.
kind of guys who have dealt with this injury, I'm sure they're like, okay, thank goodness. Now we don't have to worry about that. But here's the thing. You're running from a defender and they catch you from behind, they can still hip drop tackle you. All that happens, you get a 15-yard flag, you can still hurt your ankle. So I don't know how much is
Yeah.
going to detract a player from doing that. And then, what other kind of tackle is going to be the result of them trying not to do this hip drop tackle? Is it going to hurt the defensive player, them trying to adjust to this new style of play that they have to? And it's just all these chain reaction kind of things that, are going to end up happening. Some of them maybe aren't going to be as bad as what I'm making it out to be, but I always look at the most negative scenarios that can come from any of these rule changes and just take it from there. For the kickoffs, I don't think this is a player safety thing as much as the hip drop tackle is. I think it's more about generating excitement for the fans for a play that used to be exciting. And they took this page from the XFL so that essentially with the way they're stacking the defense and the return team, you have to return this kick. And the kicking team isn't going to put it in a place where they're going to get you the ball on the 30-yard line. So one of the competition committee's goals is for 80% kickoff returns next year. So if it's a quick 5-10 yard scamper, you're catching it inside the 20, you're still getting the ball at the 25, within the 20 to 25 yard line. and it's going to be a little more action for the fans. So the kickoff, I'm definitely a bigger proponent of than the hip drop tackle ban.
Yes, yeah. What we saw after the rule change a couple years ago, where they moved the kickoff, up. What was it, 10 yards? I think they moved it up, where from the 25 to the 35, where every kick is essentially out of the back of the end zone.
Yeah.
It created a play that was essentially, you know, erased from football. And it created it completely deleted a play from football, and
It was
special
just
teams is
emotion.
so freaking crucial.
Yeah.
And so I think this does bring back a little bit more there. And the exciting part to see is guys like Andy Reid and guys like Bill Belichick, and coaches that are very that study the game and rule changes, where they can exploit weaknesses in the new rule, and
Right.
where how they can be able to leverage this to work out better for the team. So this one I'm on board with. So the hip drop tackle, I will say things like this just water down the game, and they start to wash out actual play and talent of the game.
Mm.
Whereas you get guys that have been tackling their whole lives a certain way. And again, to your point, if you got to tackle Derrick Henry, there's like maybe 10 guys in the league that could fill a gap when Derrick Henry's coming through full steam ahead. And
Right.
still, he's probably winning 6 or 7 of those battles. And so when you just continue to stack against the defense, right? We've seen this for like the last 10 years in the NFL rule changes, where everything goes against the defense. And to your point about it being so subjective, where the refs have been so bad, specifically the last 3 to 4 seasons, they have been so bad at making right now calls, judgment calls on the fly, where there has been a small change in refereeing, or from I guess Big Brother up top, where they can take a look at those calls and reverse some of those calls. What the guidelines are around that, I haven't really looked into that very much, but I think there's going to be somebody for every single game, or I don't know how it's going to lay out, where if they make calls like this, where those calls can be reversed if it's sent up to the booth. And how that's going to work out, I don't know, especially on the fly as the game is going. That's not an easy call to make. And we're going to kind of see the way I kind of see this hip drop tackle going along is going to be somewhat similar to the horse collar, where you have the obvious horse collar. Somebody grabs the pads. That's a horse collar. They drag them down from the back or the front. Really, you can drag somebody down from the front for you can
Mm-hmm.
get a horse collar. But where if you even just grab the jersey around that collar of those shoulder pads, you're getting called for that. And
Yep.
whether that's the intention of the rule or not, I don't know. But that's where things, you set something in line, and then they kind of get a little loose as time goes along, and then we have a completely different rule after maybe a couple 3 or 5 years, where things have the game's evolved around the rule, but so have the refs. And
Yeah.
so that's where you get this position of everybody is so confused on what the actual standard is. And then if you have 3 games at noon, it is not being called consistently in those 3 games all
No.
at the same time, right? So that's also a concern with that. So I have I don't know who takes action. I don't know what party or organization or who it is that would have to push back on some of this stuff, whether it's the NFLPA, or who's got voting power inside some of these rule changes. But I think at some point we're going to have to take a look at the game as a whole and say, is this the product that we are trying to put out anymore? So I will say the one thing that's really kind of holding the NFL afloat as far as these rule changes and getting people in to watch the games is gambling, where,
Pat Mahomes.
where
Oh yeah,
yeah.
gambling.
I don't even I let's say I hate the Raiders, and I do, but I got $20 on them to beat, whoever it may be. I'm clicking in to watch that game. You know what I mean? So I think now I've
It
kind of
better be
gone
the
down the
Bears
rabbit
or
hole.
something if you're putting 20 on the Raiders.
Now I'm down the rabbit hole. But there's a couple of things we want to talk about here. One being 2 games on Christmas Day, which we kind of briefly said, and then the trade deadline has moved to Week 9. Walk through those a little bit. I'm not familiar with the trade deadline move. This one's new to me, but the Christmas Day games, this one is I'm salty personally, just because of the position I was put in last year as a season ticket
Yeah.
member. I want to stay at home, spend time with my family, watch the game in my jammies while I'm drinking hot cocoa on my couch after just picking up a freaking, 1,000 square foot of wrapping paper in my house, and then, go on and do whatever for the rest of the day. But that was a shitty position to be put in as a season ticket member for the Chiefs, because that was a home game for us.
Right. We had to scramble to offload those tickets. I think I ended up giving away mine for free to a relative. So, that was all good, holiday spirit and all that good stuff.
Merry Christmas.
But it's one of those situations where, I was talking to my wife about it and I was like, "Do you see?" I was like, I always run NFL stuff by her and sometimes she sees it, sometimes she doesn't, but this is one of those things where she didn't see it. And she goes, "What's the big deal if it's a nighttime game? We could still go." I was like, "Why would we go to a game on Christmas night at Arrowhead? I don't want to spend Christmas Day there." And she's like, "Well, we did that one year." I was like, "Yeah, well, that was before we had a daughter." She goes, "Okay, that's a fair
Yeah.
point." That's just
Yeah, I was
really not something
22.
that I want to do now that I have, a kid and the future's not going to see me with less kids. It's going to be more. We're going to add more to this family, and it's going to be one of those things where I'm just not going to want to go to Arrowhead on Christmas Day. And not saying Arrowhead and the Chiefs are always going to host a game on Christmas, but I'm speaking more for fans across the NFL because there's going to be 2 teams hosting games on that day, and it falls on like a Tuesday. So
Yeah.
for the fans, it's not great. It's not fun to, have to focus on that. Arrowhead in particular was empty, and it's the Raiders. Like
Yeah,
that
right.
place is jumping on Raider Hater Week. And that
Yeah.
was not the case on Christmas Day, and you could see the energy was different.
Yeah. What
I don't know.
what a
It's
game to pick to put on Christmas Day, the Raiders? Come on.
I
The
know.
Raiders and Chiefs?
We'll
Come
see
on.
what they pick this year, but that's definitely going to be something that I think, they're trying to make Black Friday an annual thing. Thanksgiving, they already have that. They're trying to take Christmas from the NBA, doing a good job at
Uh,
that. New
yeah, I
Year's
already
Day is
took it.
probably next. And then who knows, maybe when they expand it another week, they'll try and take Labor Day over as well. So, I mean, that's one of those things the NFL is the NFL's king. People are going to watch it on TV, so then they're going to host the game on that day. I think that's just the facts of it.
Yeah.
Sucks for the players, short rest, sucks for the fans where, they're put in a position to not be able to go to that game.
Yeah. Freaking all these
The,
games on school nights, man. Come on.
I know. The trade deadline got pushed another week, which I think this is a good place to kind of wrap it. Really, it's the last big time rule change, and it makes sense. They extended the season another week. It only makes sense to push that trade deadline more towards the middle of the season, give teams a better opportunity to make some of those deals. Because it felt like such a long, like the trade deadline. I don't know how you felt about this last year, but it felt like it snuck up on you so fast. And then we just had so much season left where teams, instead of getting an opportunity to trade some of those star players that want to go contend, they're having to cut the player and they don't get an opportunity to get anything in return. And now the player's subject to waivers. Like this gives teams and in a roundabout way some players a little more flexibility to choose where they're going to go if they decide to leave the team. We see this in the NBA a ton with players leaving poor situations, finding themselves with a new team. The only difference is if they get their contract bought out in the NBA, they're not subject to waivers like they would be in the NFL. So, this I think is a good thing. Excuse me. I think this is a good thing for the NFL. I think it's a good thing for the franchises and the players as well. So, it just makes sense to me.
Yeah, I feel like every year it here comes the trade deadline. You're like, holy shit, already. And you look at some of the I think another point to go into that is injuries, right? So it gives another week of of potential for injuries where if something pops up, you have an opportunity to go out and make a move to replace a guy that's been injured. But I think even week 9 is a little short. I think we could see it pushing over to week 10 here in three or 4 years, and extending that a little bit just to give some more flexibility. And really, why not? At that point in the season, week 9 you still have an opportunity. Week 8 you still have an opportunity. Week 10, if you're freaking 3-7 or week 10, you're toast, right? If you're four
Yeah.
and six, you're probably toast. If you're 5-5, you're hanging on. But uh, yeah, I think I like week 10, but it'll be interesting to see how this plays out for teams this year, and that's another positive move. So,
Yeah.
Dan, that was a good one. Let's wrap it up, buddy. What do you say?
Yes, sir, man. A lot more changes that are going to come for the Kansas City Chiefs as we kind of move through this offseason. I'm excited to get into the draft and maybe talk about more of that stuff on the next show, forecasting who we can draft and what that might look like. But Trey, it's good to have you back, brother. Good to get another show in, and um, appreciate everybody listening.
All right, guys, let's go Chiefs.
Peace.